everyone. All right, we looks like things are working well. So welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Mazziata, the activities coordinator here at YCAPS. I'm stepping in today for our usual host and program director of the series, Amani Kidd, who's behind the scenes doing the tech today, as she has been recently. Of course, Amani, we look forward to having you back as the on-screen moderator soon. Along with myself and Amani, we are also joined today by Mr. John Chesen, who will be presenting on beer in Japan. So a little bit about him. So Mr. Chesen's first exposure to Japan was in 1988. Exposure, that was an interesting pronunciation. It was in 1988 as a research assistant to Tokyo University Professor of International Relations, Watanabe Akio, at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. A 30 plus year association with Japan ensued. So it's included a year in the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, the JET program for those that know about it, 12 years in the satellite telecommunications industry, and 15 years and counting with Baird Brewing. So John holds a master's degree in international relations from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, great school, and an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. So he's not just a grungy beer maker. He's got the academic chops behind him as well. But so I just want to mention to everybody as well some kind notes for getting to know Japan. Please refrain from turning on your microphones during the duration of today's recording and presentation. That will help us to avoid any hot mics and other issues popping up, so that way we can make sure we can hear our speaker clearly throughout today's event. That's pretty much all I've got. I'm going to turn things over to our great speaker. He can go right ahead and start telling us about the wonders of beer in Japan.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And behind the scenes, Amani. A technical note, I'll be cooperating with Amani today on sharing the presentation slides. It's nice to meet everyone on this early morning in 2026. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining me. Normally the only time I drink beer this early is on Super Bowl Monday here in Japan. But I'm happy to talk about it. And thank you for joining me. Let's go ahead and pull up the presentation. Again, I'm John Chesen. I'm a co-managing partner at the Baird Brewing Company based in Shuzenji in Shizuoka Prefecture. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of the talk I'd like to make. First of all, I drank beer for years and enjoyed it thoroughly without really knowing too much about how beer is actually made. And that's maybe the case for others. So I thought I would go through a very brief primer using a schematic on the process by which beer is made. And next, I'll do, in the interest of time, and also because of my relatively ignorance about the early era of beer and the beer industry in Japan, I'll do a highly condensed timeline on the history of beer in Japan. The big event for our industry in Japan, I won't call it the Big Bang, but deregulation happened in 1994. That kicked off Jibiru, followed by what we now call craft beer, craft beer. I'll then briefly introduce my company, the Baird Brewing Company, which really was at the outset of this transition between Jibiru and craft beer. I'll close with a few thoughts and ruminations about the current situation and the future prospects for beer in Japan, including craft beer. And we can then move in the second half of today's program to questions and answers. And I look forward to that part the most, the dialogue, the questions coming from you. Next slide, please. So here, going from left to right on your screen, is the process of making beer. Malting, this usually takes place off-site. This is another company that does it. Very few breweries in the world actually have a malting facility as part of their brewery operation. One that I can remember vividly is the Coors Brewing Company in Golden, Colorado. They still have a dedicated rail line bringing barley to their malting facility, which sits right next to their main USA brewery. So that's an integrated one. Mostly, though, we procure malt from others. And malting is basically steeping barley in water to allow hormones to operate in the endosperm of the barley and kick off an enzymatic process. That is arrested by a process of kilning. And then the product is ready to send to the brewer. Inside the brewery is the mill, and this is the process of gently opening the barley so that later in the mashing process, step 3, warm water can begin to allow the enzymes in the malt to be activated again and begin converting the starches into sugars. We then go to the mashing process. I'm sorry, the lautering process, and this is taking what the liquid that has been created in the mashing process, and it separates the grain husks from the wort. And this is really in the brew house what the brewer is after. A lot of people see a brew house and they say, well, this is where beer is made. Actually, the brew house has one objective, and that is to make a sugar-like liquid called worts, W-R-T. A brewer in Hong Kong once had an interesting observation. He said on this matter, he said, when we make spaghetti, the object is to keep the grain and throw out the water, right? We throw out the pasta water unless we put a little bit in the sauce, but we keep the grain. In lautering, it's the opposite. We're throwing out the spent grains. They're going to become feed for cattle or fertilizer for a field. And we're keeping that liquid. We're keeping that pasta water, if you will. That's what the brewer is after in the brew house. We then boil the wort to sterilize it and to begin hopping it, adding hop flavor and aroma. We then go to fermentation. And in the case of, we go to fermentation, which is where the yeast begins to interact with the wort and create two byproducts, alcohol and CO2 or carbonation. After the beer is fermented, it is conditioned to allow flavor maturation. And from then, it is packaged, sometimes filtered, sometimes unfiltered, as in our case. And from packaging, it goes out into the marketplace. It might be in a keg, a bottle, or a can. So that is briefly the process of making beer. I can later on, if there's any questions deeper on any of these steps, I can discuss those. Next slide, please. So here's a timeline of the history, and I've basically done it according to Japan's the cycles, the eras defined by the change in emperor. So the Meiji era, well, in fact, just a little bit prior to the Meiji era, we can say that during the Japan's Sakoku period or closed period of the Tokugawa shogunate, there was no beer in Japan, but a little bit of knowledge of beer came through rangaku, or study of Dutch things. And this was the Dutch who were allowed, because they were not proselytizing for Christianity, they were allowed to stay at this small island off of Nagasaki, Dejima, and continue trading with Japan And through that process, knowledge of what was happening in Holland and elsewhere in Europe begins to make its way to the Tokugawa shogunate. And in that body of knowledge, there is some mention of beer. In 1853, Commodore Matthew C. Perry of the U.S. Navy, famously comes to open up Japan to trading. He delivers a letter from United States President Millard Fillmore in that same year on that same visit, and says, I'll be back next year to get your answer. He returns in 1854, and in the same year, the Nichibe Washin Joyaku is concluded. This is the Japan-America Treaty of Amity and Friendship. There is a celebration to mark the conclusion of this treaty. And to this celebration, the United States delegation brings a working telegraph, a 1/4 scale steam locomotive, and 3 casks of beer. The Japanese delegation has mixed reactions to the beer. Some call it magic water, so 5 stars, 4 or 5 stars. Others, however, give 0 stars or 1. And in fact, one of the evaluations on record is bitter horse piss wine. So mixed reactions. But in the years after that, especially in Yokohama, we have beer coming into Japan, generally from overseas. One of the beers that was available at that time, primarily to the foreign community in Yokohama, was Bass Pale Ale, which is still made to this very day. The most noteworthy character in this period is William Copeland, American William Copeland, who starts the Spring Valley Brewery. Interestingly, William Copeland was a naturalized United States citizen. The name he was born with in Norway was Johan Martinius Thoresen. So he goes to America, becomes William Copeland, and winds up at some point in his life in Japan. In 1869 and 70, he starts the Spring Valley Brewery in Yokohama next to the Amanuma Pond. Copeland is at some point, he claims, and we don't quite know where he received this training, but claims to have been trained by Germans in brewing. We do have evidence, though, that his beer was very good, and he was highly regarded as a beer maker, so it's probably true. Also, at the brewery site, he builds a 210-meter cave into the side of a hill where he places his fermentation tanks. This, too, is a historic and classic German design feature in the years before refrigeration, to keep beer cold and allow it to ferment, or to lager, as they say. Copeland is a skilled entrepreneur and an early adopter of new technologies, including the use of preservatives and pasteurization, which had just been invented by Louis Pasteur in France a couple of years earlier. He's a marketer. He has a delivery cart, but it's also making its way around Yokohama to show the brand, if you will. He enters into a partnership. So he's a skilled deal maker, if you will, with a fellow named Emil Wygand. And this goes very well. The two of them expand into wholesaling beer ingredients and equipment to others in Japan, other fledgling breweries. In an era when transportation is very difficult, especially on land, on dirt roads, they managed to establish branches in Kobe, Hakodate, and Nagasaki. Unfortunately, and this is one of the themes in business failures, Copeland and Wygand begin to have disputes. They sue each other. These are taxing to them in terms of time and resources. And ultimately, I believe it was in 84, the Spring Valley Brewery fails. Still, in several iterations, which we don't have time to get into, the Spring Valley Brewery becomes what is today Kirin Brewing Company. So this is really not only the start of brewing in Japan, but the start of something that continues to this very day. More generally in this period, the Meiji era, over 100 breweries are formed and operate, and they produce an expensive and distinctively German niche product. So very much dependent on German know-how, German equipment, German ingredients. The Taisho era, 1912 to 26, only a half dozen breweries survived during this period, mainly due to a shared business plan that is inherently, prone to failure, and that is that breweries just sold through, sellers in the marketplace, but not at a price. There was not at a fixed price. So I'm going to sell you my beer for 10. You can mark it up to 12 and sell it. Instead, they provided beer, and in the marketplace, the sellers, their only obligation under this business model was to return the proceeds, some amount of the proceeds of their sales. And so you can imagine, with lots of sellers, a price war breaking out. And the result of this price war being that very little in the revenue obtained from the wholesale market gets back to the breweries. So they were in financial crisis, and they didn't really know how to control the marketplace and extract value from the business. So a flawed business model is sort of the characteristic of this period, and only a half dozen breweries are going to make it out of it. Still, in terms of consumption, factory workers and military personnel begin to drink beer and experience beer in Japan. Also, of note, in 1876, is the beginning of one of the other important brewery names in Japan, and that's the Sapporo Brewing Company. This is not founded by an entrepreneur. It instead, if you will, the origin story of Sapporo is the Hokkaido Colonization Office. It's the government wanting to, further establish its presence in this new colony, this new acquisition called Hokkaido. This was reorganized in 1888 as Sapporo Beer Kabushiki Gaisha, KK. Let's move on to the Showa era here. For the first 20 years, the breweries do break through this impasse in the way they run their businesses with wholesalers. And they gain control over these retail networks, but they remain heavily reliant on imported ingredients and German engineers. So beer in this first period of the Showa era really is still heavily a German beer and German technology and German technician story. World War II then happens, and because of the constraints on the disruptions of it, this is when Japanese breweries at last achieve material and technical self-sufficiency. This is also, and for me, a very interesting period as I read about it. This really has showcases the importance of the Japanese government, the Ministry of Finance, as a guiding force in the beer market. And this really, frankly, persists to this day. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So the Ministry of Finance is they come forward. During the war, rice, as you can imagine, becomes scarce. It becomes a strategic commodity. And so rice is the ingredient that one uses to make nihonshu, Japanese sake. It is deemed to be more important than barley. And so the government engineers a switch, if you will, in consumption, in emphasis and availability from sake to beer. So for strategic reasons, beer becomes important, and this really is part of the shift over to this relatively new beverage. During the war, there are aggressive tax hikes, up to 40%. Up to 40% of the Imperial Japanese Army's budget comes from alcohol tax, including the excise tax on beer. Furthermore, in 1940, a new rule is instituted by the Ministry of Finance that the minimum annual production volume that is allowable for a brewery to exist and maintain its brewing license is 1,800 kiloliters per year. This is an enormous amount of beer, and it effectively eliminates and wipes out the small players. In 1943, furthermore, the Ministry of Finance exerts total control over beer distribution. The legacy of this era is the alcohol, especially beer, the alcohol tax dependent budget. And we're going to see this persist into the post-war years. So we'll move now to the next bullet point, the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. In the 1950s, freed from influence of German brewmasters, Japan beer makers developed lighter recipes. Some scholars have called this Nihonka, the Japanization of beer. So for the first time, although these are light, Pilsner style lagers, they begin to take on a distinctively Japanese character. Also, the beginning of advertising and to a younger and often female audience. Commercials often star Japanese celebrities as well. In the 1960s and 70s, packaging becomes more creative, product lines expand, ads begin to target sub-demographics. So marketing becomes more sophisticated. And this is the beginning of the high growth year in Japan. A young, highly employed populace is moving into the middle class, and the beer industry is there to serve them. There's an unofficial post-war cartel that prevents the underselling and excessive competition of the pre-war era that I had spoken about. In 1987, the status, so in the 80s, Kirin is really dominant, but it's also a little bit boring. So they're the number one player. They're a little bit complacent. In some people's views, people are used to this beer. And Asahi, in a gambit to save its beer business, launches Super Dry. And this was a revolutionary product. From 1987 until the present moment, the top market share in Japan is held by Asahi Super Dry. So this was just a remarkable sort of Hail Mary product development and launch, and it succeeded, and it's a dominant beer in the marketplace even today. Similarly, in the 1990s, this is the advent of low malt beers. So beers where the barley content in the mix of ingredients is below 60%, or even below 40% in these beer-like products. Next slide, please. So the big breakthrough moment that allows our business and many others to come into existence is deregulation during the Hosokawa administration. And that decreases this massive minimum annual production from 2,000 kiloliters to 60. And 60 allows a small brewery, 60 kiloliters per year allows a small brewery to exist. This initial period is called jibiru, or local beer. A few of the earlier participants, which are still in business today, are Echigo, Brewery Pub Sumidagawa, which is owned by Asahi, right down by Ryogoku, Otsuka beer, Umenishiki beer, Jibiru Sandaya. They all begin in 1995. The theme, interestingly, in this period, because I had talked about big beer, industrial beer, going through a process, a little bit anyway, of Nihonka. So there's technical competence now in Japan. There's self-sufficiency in ingredients. There is a little bit of innovation, a Japanese style light lager. Uh, but in the initial phases of Jibiru, the theme is Honba Deutsche. This is real German beer. So what we have, even as small brewing comes into play, is this emphasis on German beer, and there's a widely used sort of scheme, if you will, trading companies providing a 10 hectoliter brewery, fermentation farm, and under a 2-year contract, a mustachioed German brewer. So you have in the 1990s, at the peak of Jibiru, up to 200 German brewers under contract making German style beers in these breweries. The problem, especially after the German brewers went home, was that these beers were considered takakute. They were considered not very good, and plus they were kind of expensive. So after a peak in 2000, you have a slow decline in the number of breweries to 173. Next slide, please. But overlapping with this, you have the birth of craft beer. Shokunin no biru is what it's called. Not that label in Japanese isn't used very much at all. In fact, craft beer, craft biru is the word that comes over. We like to think that we were the first ones to begin using that. I don't know that that's true, but Baird Brewing coincidentally starts in 2000. And craft beer is really an emphasis on beer rather than many of the reasons that drove these initial Jibiru businesses. Getting more tourists, regional development, local business revitalization. Machiokoshi was the term that was used a lot, diversification. If you make shoyu, for example, or soy sauce, well, that's a fermented product. Let's also make beer. So business. So these led to this beer that was just not very exciting. Takakute heibon, expensive and mediocre. But this beginning of craft beer in Japan is really taking a lot of cues from America. Great beer from Germany is never called craft beer. Great beer from Belgium is never called craft beer. But some of the interesting things happening in America, that's part of the craft brewing revolution that kicked off in the 1980s. The number of and there's a real emphasis in craft beer on diversity of styles. In the early days, it was often a return to historical styles that had been neglected: stouts, porters, red ale, brown ale, and also an emphasis on hoppy beers, a pale ale and an India pale ale, a double India pale ale. A lot of experimentation with new ingredients as well, fruits especially. And in 2018, this begins to take off. We had always noticed that, the people in Jibiru were companies, corporates, diversifying, adding another function. But from 2018 and really continuing in this very moment, you have entrepreneurs. You have, just like it had been in America, smart people, passionate people who love beer. They're not necessarily going into this as a business venture primarily. They just love beer, and they want to make beer and share beer in their communities, quitting their day jobs. And often these are technical people. These are highly paid, really bright, highly credentialed people making, top salaries at famous companies. But some of them, with or without the buy-in from family members, quit their day jobs, raise money, and start these breweries. So and one thing that's aided this, one thing that's lowered the barriers to entry in craft brewing has been, as in many other areas of interest, the emergence of China as a major manufacturing country. So now you can get Chinese brewing equipment, brew houses in small scale, high quality at a very low price. And today we have about 900 craft breweries in Japan. Next slide, please. Just a few notes on Baird Brewing, founded by my partners Bryan and Sayuri Baird in Numazu in 2000. How do Bryan and I know each other? We were classmates at Johns Hopkins SAIS. We both did Japan studies together. The original impetus, Bryan's never described it this way, but I think it's accurate, is in particular, his love of Japan. We were Japan studies people. We wanted to live and work here and make our careers here. And in his case, especially a love of beer, drinking beer, exploring beer widely, and ultimately the desire to make beer. The business bet, why? So what's the rationale behind, making a brewery in Japan? Really, this being very impressed with Japanese consumers. Japanese consumers are extremely sophisticated. They enjoy seasonality and great diversity in their own cuisine. They're curious about and embrace the global cuisines: French food, Italian food, Chinese food, Indian food. There's no food you can't find in Tokyo and some of the other Japanese cities. And a wide-ranging interest in alcoholic beverages, deep passion for wine, for sake, for shochu, whiskey, and a great competence in whiskey making. And so, but what we had was these four big industrial brewers making pretty much all the same beer, and only differentiating, seasonally by changing the design on the can, but not really the contents of the can. And so we think that there's an opportunity to, appeal to this very sophisticated clientele, our consumer base, with beers of character, with beers of diversity. The guiding philosophy, and I will say that the business bet is still open. We're still in the process of resolving whether our bet was a good one or we were a little bit too enthusiastic. The guiding philosophy of Baird Beer is that character, that's what we want to make. No matter what the beer we make, we want it to be character. What does that mean? It means that it's full of complexity, but it also has balance. If you just have complexity, you're wowed by the first sip, maybe the first two, but by the middle of the glass, you're tired. You don't want to drink any more of that beer. So in order to keep discovering it and keep enjoying it, you need complexity, but you also need that beer to be balanced. If you have a beer of character, you might have another beer or two or three of the same beer. So that's really, in fact, there is Garrett Oliver, a famous brewer of Brooklyn Brewing Company, has the 3-pint test. A really good beer is one where you want another and then another, 3 beers. Baird Brewing's philosophy, or seiho in Japanese, is we use minimally processed ingredients. And a good example of that, and I'll have a picture on the next slide, is whole flower hops. Most brewers use pelletized hops. They're easier, they're cheaper, the transportation costs are lower. We like products that are closest to their natural state, so we use only whole flower hops. And we like traditionally processed ingredients. Our malt, our base malt, Maris Otter from Crisp Malting Company in England, is floor malted. This is a centuries old, labor intensive, artisanal process of malting. The malt is more expensive, but it protects a tradition, and we like that. Baird beers are all unfiltered. So I showed the brewing schematic earlier. We don't actually filter out the yeast before packaging the beer. The yeast is still in the beer. The beer is still alive and evolving in the package, the keg or the bottle. And importantly, this is another characteristic of our Seiho, our brewing methodology. All Baird beers are secondarily fermented in package. And this is less to get more alcohol, but to get natural carbonation. Most all industrial brewers and most craft breweries force carbonate their beer. They use an external artificial source to inject CO2 into the beer and bring it up to a level that gives pleasing carbonation to the drinker. We don't do that. We secondarily ferment, a process analogous to the creation of champagne, to create natural carbonation and get our carbonation level up to the level that a drinker will enjoy it at. Next slide, please. Just a few photos. I talked about minimally processed ingredients. In the lower right-hand corner there, you see whole flower hops. We have then just working through some of these other photos, the brew house, which I talked about. This is often, again, where people say, oh, the beer is made here. Really, all of these tanks are used for creating wort, for creating the sugar water, the pasta water, if you will, that we're going to feed to yeast. And that's when beer making begins. So this is our brew house at the bottom in Shuzenji. In the top, you have our tencho at the Takaranobaba tap room in Tokyo, Honomi, ready to serve a few beers. And in the bottom left, you have our Yokohama tap room. And I hope that many of you will join us there on January the 24th. This will be the last stop on the Yokohama brewery tour on that day. So we have 4 tap rooms in Tokyo, 1 in Yokohama, this one, the Pashamichi tap room. And lately we've been developing a different concept called the Baird Beer Station, which is just a smaller place, a smaller footprint, and that can be staffed by one person, mainly light snacks, otsumami, and 10 taps of beer, sometimes bottles as well. And so we're finding it easier to build out these places and to operate them. It's unlikely that we'll do any more full service tap rooms that also have a kitchen and a food menu. Next slide, please. A few thoughts on the future of beer in Japan. When we started in the year 2000, beer production in Japan, including both Jibiru and the major breweries, was 7.1 million kiloliters. Over these 25 years, the production of beer has fallen by 45%. And we see beer everywhere in our communities, in our convenience stores. We drink and enjoy beer. So it is somewhat astounding to see that nevertheless, beer production, beer sale, beer consumption is falling steadily. Why is this happening? It's happening because of demographics. Japan is aging and the population is shrinking. Also, tastes are changing. People are drinking chuhai and shochu, sawa, highballs, etc. And then there's this phenomenon, and this is not unique to Japan. This is a global phenomenon, even extending to beer-loving countries like Germany, that the Japanese call sake banare, this divorce from this separation from drinking alcohol. And so you have young people, especially, the future of the, our future customers, increasingly stepping away from or drinking less of alcoholic beverages. This is happening in America, in Europe, in Japan. So something of concern to folks like us. Kirin are friends who date back to Spring Valley in early Yokohama. They've invested in craft beer overseas. They own a number of breweries in America, but not really in Japan. Their two big plays are they started a Spring Valley line of crafty beer. We call it crafty, not craft. and they own 1/3 of Yahoo Brewing, so Yona Yona Ale, if you will. But mainly, Kirin and the industrial brewers are moving their product development dollars, yen, I should say, away from beer and into health science products. Craft beer is just about 2%. So it hasn't taken off as it did in America. And arguably, craft beer is getting a problem similar to what the industrial brewers had. All the same, there's a real emphasis and perhaps an overemphasis now on IPAs, and within that category, hazy IPAs. And this, to me, it risks turning off consumers at the margin and saying, yeah, I don't want something that tastes ultimately like grapefruit juice. So how do you grow the market if the real focus is just hazy IPAs? Moving back to taxes and this, Japan has and will in October complete a take the final stage of a tax reduction, which is welcome, to 54.25 yen per 350 mil. But this is still extremely high. It's 8 to 10 times higher than the beer tax in America. So taxation remains a reason why the beer business is hard. It's hard to make money in, and why perhaps consumption is lower than it otherwise might be. I've run a little bit over my 30 minutes. I apologize, but I'd love to take Q&A right now.
Awesome, outstanding. Wonderful, wonderful talk. Really interesting. I have a ton of questions myself. We've been getting lots of questions in the chat. I want to encourage people to still drop some questions in the chat. I'll start us off with a few questions. I have so many though, so I hopefully try not to overwhelm you with it. I guess if I could start with a pretty simple question, as you were talking about like IPA versus hazy IPA versus this and that, and for you, of course, I'm sure you're very much versed in all of these different things. For someone like myself, I'm not a major beer drinker. So I don't know so much about craft beers particularly. And so when I go to like a craft beer bar, it could be overwhelming when I look at the menu and I see like all these different styles and names and things, and I don't have a clue about any of it. And so for someone like myself who might want to get interested and start getting involved in this, I almost don't know where to start. Any recommendation, like if someone wants to like get themselves into trying craft beers or learning more about this, what would be a good starting point? Any particular recommendation? Maybe an approachable a beer that maybe someone might want to try?
Very good question. I think in the States, the beer that really changed people's lives and brought a number of us into the industry back in the 1990s was Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. It just, for the first time, a sort of hoppy, well-balanced 5.5%, 6% beer that was different from Budweiser. It was different from Coors. And it was really, the Japanese expression is mei kara uroko. The scales flew off our eyes. Many people say that Baird Brewing's Rising Sun Pale Ale had the same effect years ago. I would just encourage you to go into a craft beer bar or now go to your local supermarket. There are growing numbers of beers, and just buy a few different ones and begin sampling them. The great thing about craft beer is that they make you think. And some of them you might not like, but you're going to think about why you don't like it. And you're going to maybe talk to a friend and say, this isn't really my thing. Or your friend might say, oh, I love it. And so one of the aspects of craft beer that I love is that it does kick off dialogue and conversation. Whereas industrial beer is really designed to make you turn all of that off and just, drink sort of, because you know the taste. It's never changed. It's balanced. It lacks complexity. So you don't think when you drink an industrial beer, but you do when you drink craft beer, and then you converse as well. Yes. And within that exploration, you will find beer styles that you like. Also in Japan, visit a German bar, a German beer bar, visit a Belgian beer bar. These are wonderful, rich brewing traditions. And in those portfolios too, you will find diversity and you will stumble upon beers that you really love. So travel widely in Yokohama and Tokyo or wherever you may be.
I like how you mentioned the idea of people talking about the beers and things like because you reminded me. I agree. I'm not a huge beer drinker myself. I'm often more of a highball type of person, but I have friends in the craft beer industry as well, and I notice whenever I'm at the bar there, people sharing their beers and trying different beers together is very common. Like it's like if someone just has an Asahi, they're not just like, "Oh, try this. Oh, you should try." I never see that. But whenever I'm at the craft beer bar, people are always trying, "Oh, I'm gonna try this one." And their friend tries this one and like, "Oh, this one's really, you should try this one." And people are constantly like sharing that experience together and like cluing in on what each of them like and it is much more of a social thing than regular beer. I have noticed that. So that's very interesting. I think it can lend itself to Japan's drinking culture of. I think that we know like in Japan when you're drinking like that socialness comes out, right? So that's really nice. It's interesting. Speaking of that, with trends in beers and things like that, I had a couple questions. So I was curious, one, what's the time frame like for when you have a concept? Okay, concept of beer. Okay, we're gonna make this beer. We have this idea of a craft beer we want to make to final product on the shelf. How long is that process? Is it quite quick or does it take a long time? And then I guess another thing I was gonna ask about, um, have you noticed any trends in what people are interested in now versus say in 2000 when you guys first started and where those trends have gone and potentially where those trends may go?
Yeah. Um, we're so in 2000, we were brewing again. We were part of this early wave of brewers that were reaching back in time. We were brewing stouts, pale ales, brown ales, amber ales, and frankly, we still brew those. Um, and so we're very much, if you will, 1990s brewers. Some of the brewers now, and this was my concern, which I sort of ruminated on towards the end there, are a little bit more into and IPA. IPA has always been an entry point into this and into craft beer, and that's great. We welcome that because you want more people, joining as consumers craft beer. But my perception and it may be off base is that right now there's too much of an emphasis on IPAs and too much of an emphasis within that category on these hazy IPAs, where a brewer, instead of trying to make the beer clear, makes it intentionally hazy. Um, there's a lot of protein floating around in there and tends to have sort of a grapefruit or mango emphasis in the taste and in the aroma. So, but this has been beyond our expectations. It's been very, very successful in bringing people into craft beer and hooking people. We don't make a hazy IPA, but many do, and this has been a fantastic category. But we're more traditional. I would say we love the diversity of beer. That really is our job as craft brewers. We consider our job anyway, is to share Belgian styles, which we make a number of, is to share German styles, which we do, to highlight some of the rich contributions of the American craft brewing revolution, and also then to bring terroir, if you will, to borrow a wine term, from Japan. So we make lots of beers with fruit that we grow right on site at our brewery in Shizenji, mikan, yuzu, ichijiku, nikki, ume. So all these, the rich bounty of the Izu Peninsula, that in addition to our water, which is spring water, is contributes to our terroir. So there's really a number of ways that the craft brewer can express individuality and appeal to consumers. We think that that terrain is vast and is
Mhm.
worth exploring, and we're a little bit concerned that the focus of competition has become simply IPAs, and within that hazy IPAs.
Mhm.
That's again our perception at the moment.
Yeah, I think I think you've got a good. I think trends they come and go, and we might be in a bit of a trend with that IPA and hazy IPA thing right now. That's very interesting. I'll tell you what, I'm not much of a beer drinker, but the way you started talking about the Mekon and all that makes me excited. I'm like, I have to start trying more of this beer. So, I mean, you must be onto something if even myself, a non-beer drinker, is sounding interested in it.
These are really
Um,
nice. They're grown right there on our property. We process them by hand. It's
It makes
enormously
sense.
inefficient.
It makes sense to
And
me. I know for like many people, we think of Japan, we think of this kind of handmade craftsmanship, this attention to detail, local flavors and local thing. I think it resonates with people. So it makes sense to me. Um, Speaking of which, look, ingredients and sourcing and where things come from. We did have a question in the chat. I'm gonna reinterpret it a little bit. Um, they were asking about like Crimea hops and other things, and it made me think, well, the hops that are coming in Japan are most of the hops coming locally sourced? Where are the hops coming from? Are breweries importing hops from what parts of the world right now? Is there potential with that type of trade?
yeah, hops are grown extensively in Japan, but most of the farmers, most of the volume, have exclusive contract with Kirin, Sapporo, and others, the big brewers. And these are hops optimized for the type of beer they make. So they're not meant to be, aromatic and very bitter. Um, Most of the hops the craft brewer is interested in, are ones that are going to deliver, a bigger punch and a wider variety of flavors and aromas. And these come, in our case, from the Pacific Northwest in America, from New Zealand, we get some from England, some from Germany, some from Slovenia. Um, there are craft some hop operations now in Japan that are supporting craft breweries, but these are fledgling and small, and the volume is relatively small. In addition, we have a hop field on our brewery site. And we do it for love. We do it so that we can have, again, a little bit of contribution of local terroir, but it's a boutique amount of hops. So we were able to make 2 or 3 beers each year, and we're really excited about that. We get to grow our own hops, but the bulk of our hops are from these countries I mentioned. Uh, Even though Japan is actually a very large hop producing country.
Interesting. I do want to ask a question for when I think of Japanese drinks, and John Bradford asked in the chat, and I'm very curious. He asked, maybe it's outside of your wheelhouse, but he asked, do you know the history of hoppy and how does that fit in? Hoppy being something that I've seen around, and I know it's very common and people doing half hoppy, half beer, but I don't know much about it. Do you know anything about hoppy and how that
I
fits
know
in?
very little about it, other than this is a just an astounding business success. This is a non-alcoholic malted beverage that is combined with an alcoholic beverage at the izakaya, at the pub, and is a popular, drink on the drink menu. It is, but because it's a non-alcoholic beverage, it's not subject to this,
The taxes.
astronomically high alcohol tax
Yes.
that I mentioned. And so, hoppy is ubiquitous. It's loved, but it's not an alcoholic beverage. So this is a business that, as a business person, we'd love to own. But it's phenomenally successful for that reason.
Interesting, interesting. I wonder if it had to do with because of the high taxes, if during times of poverty, if it was a way to kind of almost minimize the cost by like combining a little bit and then it became popular. That's potential, but I wouldn't know. It's just me
I think that that's a really good
speculating.
hypothesis to explore. That it probably came about as a an answer to budget constraints
Yeah.
in just as these happoshu and these daisan beer, these other beers that came about in the 1990s, or beer-like products, lower taxation, lower price point, and addressing the needs of a less affluent consumer
Mm,
demographic.
yeah. So if we can go way back in the past, I'm curious if you know anything about this. We had an interesting question from Jacqueline Mezziani. And she said, in medieval Europe, beer became commonplace because it actually was healthier than publicly available and polluted water. And she was curious, what was the water quality in Japan during the Meiji era and beyond? I don't know if that's in your wheelhouse or not, but do you think potentially good or bad water quality in Japan may have affected beer popularity?
My guess is that Japan did not suffer from similar water, microbes in, or at least at the level of public health, that similar problems, that there was excellent quality water available. This is something true throughout Japan, is that the water quality is excellent. So it's unlikely that Japanese citizens were suffering from illnesses that came from microbes in water. But yes, alcohol, a low alcohol beer, even a second run beer. So the top Kirin beer is called Ichiban Shibori. This is the first run beer. But if you do a second or third run, you get a beer like beer, or beer that is 1 or 2% in alcohol. But that's a high enough alcohol level to kill off the bacteria. And so that's what they were drinking in medieval times in Europe, and it was very effective. It was a third run beer. Um, I don't know if that ever took place in Japan. Certainly, sake would not have filled the bill there. It's just too high in alcohol. Although, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Speaking of beer and diversity beer, we talked a lot about various things. We are running short on some. There's quite a few questions, but there was one question I think it's always useful to ask this from Hiroki Nakanishi, who asked many questions throughout today's chat. Thank you, Nakanishi-san. He asked, which books or websites might you recommend to learn diversity of beers in the world? Is there any, so for folks that saw today's talk and they're interested in today's talk and they want to learn more, is there any particular sources or books that you might recommend for them to learn, whether it's about world beers or particularly Japanese beers and the growth of beer in Japan?
Well, one book that I
これ珍しいもの見つけた。
Yep.
何
If I can ask people to keep
う
their
ん。
mics
レディ、
off,
あれ、
please.
レディあれの、朝。
one book that I referred to in making my notes for today's talk is this one.
In Japan.
By Jeffrey Alexander. He's in the University of Wisconsin system, now more in administration and perhaps not writing as much history. But this is a superb reference book. If you really want to go deep in any of these periods that I talked about, including with back statistics to back it up, highly recommend Brewed in Japan.
I've just shared a link to that in the chat for folks on at least the Amazon.jp link for that if people would like to look into it. And you can search for potentially better deals elsewhere, but great.
Also,
Brewed in Japan looks good.
a superb book on the history of beer and beer making is this one, Beer, by Charles Bamforth. And Charles Bamforth was the Anheuser-Busch chair of fermentation sciences at the University of California, Davis, and is not only a industry recognized, top expert in fermentation sciences, but from my experience with his book, is just a beautiful writer as well. So that's a great book to go to. The Japan Beer Times is a magazine that's available throughout Japan at craft beer bars and the journalism there in both English and Japanese, so it's a bilingual, is, I think, superb.
Wonderful. I wish we had more time to ask more questions, but we are a bit out of time today. We have hit our 11 a.m. We've hit our 1 hour mark. So I want to say again, thank you to John. I will leave you the floor if there's any final things you want or if anything came to mind that you'd like to mention before we finish and before we go into upcoming events. I'll give you any last words for that.
Well, thank you all for joining me today, and I apologize for running a little bit over and shortening the Q&A time. But I do look forward to meeting you. I know there's an upcoming event on January 24th that will end at the Bashamichi Tap Room in Yokohama. I hope to meet you there. Also, just a quick shout out to someone who is on the call today, Glenn Scoggins, a scholar of many things in Japan, but also deeply knowledgeable in beer, craft beer, and beer's emergence in Yokohama. If you want to learn more about William Copeland, I encourage you to buy Glenn a beer and ask a few good questions, and many other things. So thank you, Glenn, very much.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Happy New Year. Akemashite omedetou gozaimashita ne. So it took me a little bit to get that out, but Happy New Year, everyone. Hope you have a great 2026. And that's all I've got.
Thanks, John. Thanks all. Happy New Year.
Thank you, everyone.
FadTech's IT support and mobile internet service helps make events like this one possible. Thank you.